Welcome to the brand new episode of the Tech Ketchup Show, a Nerd for Tech Originals. In this episode, we have with us Hetal Sonpal, a TEDx speaker, a startup mentor, an angel investor, and a strategy and business leader. In this episode, Hetal talks about the space of Indian startup and the relevance of mentorship in building a startup. He also discusses about the importance of understanding finance at a personal and individual level. Watch this episode till the end. This is your host Kushak Srivastav and see you on the other side. Welcome to the podcast, sir, the Tech Ketchup Show, a Nerd for Tech Originals, and I hope you have a great time with us and we have a great conversation today. Sir,
Thank you. Looking
just
forward
to
to
begin,
talking with you.
yes, sir, definitely, it's our pleasure. To begin on with the conversation, I would like you to give us a brief about your journey till now, starting from your childhood, your education, then moving on to the opportunities that you took in your professional career. The reason why I'm asking this is to get an idea, give an idea to the audiences, as well as to understand myself from your experiences and values that has made the personality that you are today. So that's why the to begin with the conversation, this question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kushagra. Thanks for the opportunity and look forward to having an engaging discussion. So about myself, I was born and brought up in Bhopal. I studied in Campion School, did my engineering from SGS ITS Indore, and did my MBA from NMIMS Bombay.
Yeah.
And I've had a 21-year career in corporate life since then. Starting with Wipro, I worked for four large organizations: Wipro, Microsoft, LinkedIn, and Intel. Primarily working across sales, marketing, strategy, alliances, across different business functions of these companies. Good experience. My experience included working in Japan, in Tokyo. I was heading the sales for multiple divisions of Wipro in Japan as well. After Intel, I have had a dabble with the startup world. I have worked with different startups as a mentor, advisor, and investor. And I've had a great experience working with startups because it's allowed me to be able to have a very engaging journey with these startups. Unfortunately, I couldn't become an entrepreneur myself, but I'm living the entrepreneurial journey through these
Yeah.
startups. And that's the primary goal of interfacing with the startup community. I think there's a lot of learning and there's, good exchange of learning, right? While I'm learning from them, they are learning from me. It's a very healthy relationship to have. Yeah.
Great, sir. So, sir, like as you said that you are very much into the startups and you are regularly interacting with startups, trying to get understand their mindset, their approaches, the problems they are trying to solve, and various other things. So, like first of all, what are some of the primary and basic things that you try to figure out in your initial meetings and conversations when you have when you start a business with them, and is there anything particular or something that you try to figure out, any value, anything that you personally resonate with, so that you can carry on the business for a long time?
So I think for me, the number one criteria is uniqueness of the business model, right? So if I'm
Okay.
engaging with a startup or an entrepreneur, the startup idea has to be something wow. It should be something interesting. It doesn't have to be like building a rocket. I'm not asking for a hyphen do project, but
Yeah.
something different. It need not be like a copy paste, like building an Uber of something or building an Airbnb of something. I think those models are not exciting for me. Yes, it might be revenue generating, it might be very promising, but that's not what excites me. Second is I do look at the profile of the founder. I try to understand what's his background, what has he done in the past, which gives him the confidence of being able to execute the startup very well. Number one. Second, of course, what do I see in it, which gives me the confidence that he'll be able to do a good job, right? I'm not insisting on an IIT background. I'm not so bent upon that. I myself am not an IIT background, but I look for someone who's had a decent enough career, some repute about the organization or the institute where he has studied or worked. Something of caliber or something of capability which stands out in his capability, because to have a decently good idea and startup, a lot of people can do that. As long as a startup is doing well, it's great. But the challenge comes in when the startup starts having challenges. So I try and see whether the individuals, founder or co-founders, how will they perform in adversity? How will they perform in tough times? I think that's more important, a judgment criteria to make, rather than whether the startup will be successful or not.
Okay, great, sir. Also, like as you said, what like as you told some of your key areas, what you look up to when you are interacting with the startups, uh, is like how much relevance do you give to the business part of the business, and then to the personal or the emotional part that the founder or co-founder is having with the business, and could like is there something that you quantify with the these parameters that you define? Is there something to quantify it, or like is it just your instinct that you go with?
No, I don't think it's a quantitative adjustment. It would not be like a 60-40 split or anything like that. It's purely qualitative. So first, the business has to attract me. The founder has to attract me. Then I would go into the details of the viability of the business and then decide whether the founder can do it or not. But no, there is not a numerical analysis here. I think it's a zero-sum game. Either the
Yeah,
entrepreneur can do it or he cannot do it. I'm not going to say whether he can do it 80% or 70%. No, it has to be like a complete vote for confidence in such cases.
great, sir. So like since you have been involved in this startup ecosystem so much, apart from bringing in the financial aid, the financial resources from your side, how do you try to be, what else do you bring to the table when you are interacting with these startups, and to what extent or to what level do you try to devote yourself and get down into the business when you are involved in any of these startups?
So I think I'll answer the questions in two parts. I think the first part is in the initial approach perspective.
Yeah.
When a startup approaches, my first answer is I'm not investing. I don't want you to talk. I don't want you to have a conversation with me primarily for funding, because I am funding plus plus. In fact, in most cases, I would rather offer a mentorship or an advisory rather than funding, because uh, in all honesty, investing in startups is a risky category, right? So
Yeah.
I don't invest a large amount of money in terms of investment. In fact, I've not cut a check recently as well. My bulk of my engagements are now towards mentorship and advisory, where I help them in terms of fundraise, in terms of sales, growth, marketing, strategy, and being like a elder brother, right? So
Yeah.
my famous uh, example which I quote is, look, I am Krishna and you are Arjun. You can either have me or my army, right? And
Exactly.
honestly, while a lot of entrepreneurs have had a tough time getting funding, in all honesty, I think it's become much more easier to get funds now than maybe 5 years back,
Okay.
because I think angel investment has become pretty cool as a profession, and a
Okay.
lot of people who don't even have details or have serious interest in startups are investing in startups and actually cutting large checks. Because they go by the herd mentality. They, if they see 10 people around them making money in startups, they feel, okay, we can also make money, and they also chip in. It's easy to enter in. It's tough to get out, especially to get out with your head held high and having made money. But when you talk about mentorship, the world is open, and I've had a extremely positive response every time I have cited this example to the entrepreneurs who approach me. I think more often than not, they appreciate the fact that someone is proactively offering mentorship as a step one. And in many cases, yes, a mentorship or advisory might not be needed, especially if the startup is mature enough where they already have funds committed from other investors. I think their primary focus would be to close that round. So they might not be looking at mentorship. But in many cases, they have really appreciated the fact that to have someone who's around more frequently. I engage with my portfolio companies, once in every 2 weeks, if not every week. I'm always available for a discussion. I don't wait for a quarterly update to hear from them. I proactively reach out and discuss with them in terms of what's going on in their business and all. So I think that element is a great give and take, because I do see a lot of affinity in such engagements. I have a lot of relevant experience, which I feel it's time for me to give back to the community. And I think from that perspective, the engagement goes really well.
Wow.
That's the first part. I think second part, I think from a continuation of journey perspective, the frequency and the topics are mutually discussed and set aside. There's a good camaraderie between myself and the entrepreneurs in terms of what does he expect from me, what do I expect from him, and once the understanding is clear, a lot of explicit communication is not needed, and there's a straightforward communication happening between us.
Great. So like as you mentioned that entering as an investor into the startup world is easy, but getting out with head high held is tough. Could you just elaborate that and explain like why is it so, and why is it being so fancy becoming an angel investor nowadays, even if you don't have that knowledge? Why people are doing like, because if we see it is not good for them as well as for the company in which they are investing. But why is this culture being so fancied upon in the current scenario?
Okay. Okay, good question. So I think the entry and exit, why the situation varies, is because the exit point is basically decided on the fate of the company, how the company performs going forward. So if the company is really successful, if the entrepreneur, if the startup is able to really do really well in business and get the next round of funding, get the next set of investors to come on board, get an exit for the angel investor, it should not be a big deal. But it doesn't happen all the times.
Yeah,
If the startup is not able to do well, getting the next round of funding gets difficult, and the subsequent journey becomes much more difficult. Many times the startup reach out to the same angel investor and ask for a follow-on round, and many angel investors are not very comfortable because they already are worried about their first tranche which they had invested in the company, and the second tranche can become more difficult. So I think depending on the nature of business, depending on the ecosystem, a situation like COVID is unprecedented. Many startups have folded up just because they were not able to sustain themselves for 6 months of no business under the lockdown, and it's not easy. Yeah, a lot of people have gone through tough times, but even without Corona, tough times can come up, right? I mean, you visualize a business model and it just did not fly beyond a particular point. Some government regulations came in, some big competition came in, and they wiped out your market. So all these scenarios are the likely scenarios where the entrepreneur and the startup might have to fold up, which means the angel investor will not get his original money back. Forget about getting any upside. Now, to answer your second question in terms of why it's become very attractive, why people who don't understand angel investment are also coming in, I think it's got to do with the media. Media has created a lot of hype around. Oh, Amitabh Bachchan has invested in so and so startup. Deepika Padukone has invested in so and so startup. Real estate companies are investing in startup. People who invested in gold are investing in startups. So, media has been sharing a lot of stories about how unusual category of people are now becoming angel investors. And I think, then people get a FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And they feel, oh, if we don't invest, then we'll probably be missing out on something like that. So let's dabble around it and let's accept it. There are a lot of people who have loose cash lying around, in the sense, spare cash, which they're not investing anywhere, and they can probably quote unquote afford to lose in the sense like they can take a bet on it. No, nobody would like to lose money, but people can take a bet on it and say, yeah, if I can get 5x out of this money in 2 years, it's far higher than what any of the other asset classes would give me. So I
exactly.
think the ratio or the unattractiveness of the other asset classes like Before March, the stock market was in a pretty bad shape. March had seen a major meltdown as far as the stock market was concerned. Real estate has been in a bad shape for a very long time. Gold has been shooting up with no let down in the hike. So entry point has become difficult. So because there are less attractiveness as far as the other asset class is concerned, I think that's why angel investment has gained some attraction as well. So I think these are the key reasons why more people are actually getting into angel investment.
Okay, so so like now after this COVID crisis, where like how do you view the Indian startup space, and will this COVID crisis going to act as a catalyst, and we are going to see some massive Indian startups in next 5 years?
So I think COVID has definitely been a big shock to the Indian startup ecosystem. A lot of companies were completely unprepared. A lot of companies had over-invested in their business, which were severely impacted because of the lockdown. So I think if I had to categorize the startup ecosystem, I would categorize into two parts, right? Startups whose business were directly impacted by COVID and remain impacted, travel or leisure or fashion, hotel, right?
Yeah.
The Airbnbs of the world, right? Those remain impacted. So that's one category. Second category is startups which were partially impacted because of the lockdown and not because of Corona.
Okay.
Lockdown disallowed their people from working. Lockdown disallowed them from opening their shop. Lockdown disallowed them from them executing their services. They had a short-term impact, which was 2 months, 3 months. I think 1 month was minimum to start with. The month of April was completely gone. The month of May was almost completely gone for most of the businesses. It's only in June when certain businesses started opening up. People got their work around in terms of
Yeah.
how to manage in terms of government regulations in the opening up and still be able to do business. So I think companies which are partially impacted are now, I think, nearing normal levels. At least the startups which I'm engaged with, I know for a fact, I think at least 50-60% of them will reach their pre-COVID levels by end of the year. And I think that's a handsome recovery, I should say, because they had completely gone to zero, right? There was zero revenue in month of April and May. And to get back from zero revenue to a decent revenue run rate, considering the fact that your business has opened up, the consumers are not buying, right? Just because your apparel business is now open for business doesn't mean that people will start buying apparel left, right, and center, right? The sentiment of the people has been impacted. I think that's a bigger challenge. Closure and opening of the business is a smaller thing. Closure for a few months is a smaller thing. Closure forever is still a smaller thing as long as you know that when you open up the business, let's say if you are running a hotel chain, and even if you know that, by let's say January, you will have full-fledged business running and all. But if people don't come and occupy the rooms, right? People don't travel the way they used to. That's going to be a bigger hit. And I think that's a much tougher challenge right now, right? As we are seeing in the media, the Diwali sales are going on the various e-commerce marketplaces, and as of now, the response has been very high, very positive. I just hope for everyone's benefit that the momentum remains. But if that momentum is not sustained beyond the Diwali sale, and if late November and December the sales again go down, that will become another challenge for startups. Now, compared to a large enterprise, the startups have a bigger challenge in scenarios like this because of the lower cash they have in the bank, right? They have low free cash flow, which means they can take limited risk, right? They can afford to keep limited number of people when the cost is needs to be minimized to the level, to the bare minimum, right? So I think that's where it comes, and I think it's a test of character. It's a test of network, how well networked you are, how well connected you are with people who are there for mentoring and advising you in these tough times. It's not easy to do the journey all alone, and you should not be doing it. You should be reaching out to people in the industry and having conversations to understand what needs to be done. I, by the way, had conducted a series of chats in May, June timeframe, where I interacted with my portfolio companies, understood how they were handling the crisis. A lot of people learned from that, and I think it was a good learning point for them to be able to.
Yeah.
And when you get a platform to speak on, you get more prepared. If you're
Exactly.
just sitting quietly in your office for months together trying to figure out a solution, you go slow. But once you know that you need to, go into the public domain and talk about what you've done, a lot of new ideas come up and a lot of solutions come up. Your team gets motivated. Oh my God, now this is serious, right? We need to have
Yeah.
a serious plan, which our boss is going to talk about. So we make sure that, it's a properly well thought out plan.
Exactly. Great, sir. Sir, since you are so well equipped yourself on the knowledge of managing money, managing your own finances, managing your assets, but what I feel and what I believe is that this is a topic which is very less discussed in our Indian household, and people like don't take it as a priority in getting knowledge into this subject. Also, this is important because not just for from individualistic point of growth, but also for the growth of national economy. Now my question to you is, where do you see where do you feel the Indian society fails in getting this concept of money and managing finances? Where does the Indian society fails in getting this concept right? And the second part of the question is, how do you feel a child at different ages could be taught and mentored in getting the right knowledge about this crucial concepts of managing the finances? Because once he steps into managing his own finances, he has a better vision of the market and could manage his or her own finances more efficiently and effectively.
I think a very important point. I think there is a significant lack of understanding as far as finance among the Indian youth and Indian students is concerned. I think it's a deeply ingrained problem which needs a long-term solution.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that because just a week back I finished a beautiful book called The Psychology of Money, which specifically addresses on this point. It talks about how people have undermined the importance of savings and investment. They don't realize the fact that it's not about earning money; it's about managing money, which
Yeah.
you earn, right? And I think there are two sets of people in the young group. There are some set of people who feel that what's the point in managing or saving or investing when you're not earning enough? So you say, let me earn more than what I need to spend. Let me reach that level where I would be earning, let's say, a lakh rupees a month when my monthly expense core minimum is 30,000. Throwing around is another 20,000. I still have 50,000 left. Okay, then I'll start thinking about how to save, how to invest that money somewhere. There are other set of people who are not earning a lakh, they're probably earning a 5 lakhs. And they're right, as long as I'm earning so much money and my bank is always having some loose cash, why the hell should I worry? Because I'm going to be earning money all the time. I'm going to be earning significant amount. I'm going to be earning more than what I need to spend all the time. So I never need to worry. Retirement तो बहुत दूर की बात है. So
Yeah.
people tend to push off this decision for a very long time, which is I think a wrong strategy. I think the pundits have proven the point that the best time to start saving and saving for your future is the 20s. So if there is any saving or investment plan which you enter into in the early 20s, you are probably likely to be 100x better than starting in 30s or 40s. That's a amount of scalability which you can achieve by starting early. It's multiple. It grows in multiples, and the multiples can vary significantly. The sooner you're able to start, and I think that's the catch. Now I think the Indian media has woken up. I've been seeing the advertisements on mutual fund investment for a very long time. I think it's a
Yeah.
very safe and simple way to start. SIPs are a great way to start. A lot of people during Corona have actually moved towards stock investment. And I think the primary motivation has been because the market has been on a significant up since March. There is some statistics about 6 million new demat accounts have been opened in the last 6 odd months, which is significant compared to the overall number of demat accounts existing in the country before that. And it goes to show a lot of uneducated investors are coming in. And my fear is that more people are going to lose their money than the number of people who are going to make money, which is very sad. I know when people have small amount of money to invest, they cut short on advisory. They try and apply their own smart minds based on media. and the stuff which comes in media is coming in too late, right? So if you open the Economic Times this morning, and if there are tips on, two, three companies in which you should invest, those companies have already gone beyond the level of investment. By the time the news I read the media, there are 100 other people or maybe 1,000 other people who already knew that this company is a great investment, and they've already put in that money, which has already made the stock go up far beyond the level of comfort from an investment perspective. So it's coming too late for you. Your capability lies when you are able to do independent assessment of a particular stock and be able to make prudent judgment on why that company is great as a target for investment right now, how long you need to stay invested, what's the target investment you're looking at, and have a strong heart that you will not walk out of the investment just because the stock starts going down because of certain reasons. A great investor is not the one who makes money constantly. He's the one who is able to hold his head high and stay confident and stay invested when the stock is not doing well. Because if you're able to weather the downside, the upside will come sooner or later. But you need to give time and you need to have patience. So I think knowledge on the finance markets, the various options for investment and saving, and having patience, I think these are important criteria which everyone should really spend their time on. There's ample amount of literature available, even if you don't want to spend money on books. I think today Google and the online resources, the free resources itself, there are so many resources which you can get ample amount of information as far as saving and investment is concerned.
Great, sir. So like now, since while I was researching for this podcast, I went through your LinkedIn profile and found that you have been an avid reader and have read a lot of stuff. Like since lockdown, you have been reading a lot of stuff, and before that, also you have been a constant reader and learner. So now, my question to you is just out of curiosity that how did you realize at some point of time the importance of reading and listening to the authors and what they are trying to convey through their skills and knowledge, whatever they have written in their literature. And second part is complete like just reading a book is just not a complete process until and unless you try and try to find out something that you could utilize for your personal or professional life. So now how do you whenever you are reading a book, how do you approach through that reading process, and how do you take out the crux that is valuable for yourself and filter out and use it for in your life?
So I think it was 2016, 17. I think it was 2017 when I actually read a couple of articles online, and I came to know that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, not Warren Buffett, I think Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, they read about 52 books a year. And I think their logic is simple: 52 books a year is one book a week. Exactly. And I was like, if even if I live 7 lives, I will never be able to beat these guys in terms of achievements, what they've done, right? Either in terms of the kind of companies they've built up, the kind of wealth they've accumulated. But I said, number of books they read in a year, that's a number which I can surely beat. So I decided to, outsmart both of them by reading 100 books a year. I took up that target in 2018. I achieved it. In 2019, I said, let me not have a target. Let me just continue the flow of reading the way I've been doing. And let's see if I'm able to reach 100. And I actually crossed 100 in 2019 as well. This year, thanks to Corona, I've had a disproportionately higher amount of time to read. So as we speak, I'm on my 90th book right now. And considering the fact that I have more than 2 months, I should be going much beyond 100 as well. But number is one thing. I think your question about the importance of reading is very relevant. And the fact that while these two gentlemen read so many books, I also realized the amount of intellect and the knowledge they have. And I do believe there's a strong correlation between reading and knowledge, which comes way beyond what school you are from or what college you are from. I think schools and college give you just the basic fundamentals in life. In order to live a good life, in order for you to be able to outsmart all the challenges which you face in life, reading lots of books is, I think, the only way, is the only solution. Because yes, experience will teach you a lot, but experience, there is a lot of chance to it, right? Yes, in books also there is a chance. There's a luck element in books because there are millions of books being published every year. So if you don't get access to the right books or nobody tells you which are the right books, it can take you a lot longer as well to be able to gain experience on books as well. No doubt about that. But still, I think you cannot sit under a cave and read books. So if you're constantly talking about what you're reading, if you're constantly talking to other people, if you're reading enough book reviews online, I'm sure you can get to right set of books which can make a big difference to your own life. And when I talk about books, of course, I'm referring to non-fiction than fiction, because fiction has its own learning, and but I would say that fiction has to be treated like a bonus. If you read 2, 3 non-fiction books and you want some entertainment, and rather than watching a web series, you read a fiction book, I think you can get far more entertainment by reading a book than watching a web series. I think the challenge with books is that the medium is not as convenient as watching something on the phone or the laptop or the TV. And the dramatization which happens on media is far more than on the book. But yeah, some of the book fictions even are classics, and they can actually be as entertaining as well. So in non-fiction books, starting with self-help, management, biography, literature, technology, there are umpteen number of topics on which you can really find good books. History is a great source of learning as well. Learning about science is again a great source as well. So on every possible topic, there are millions of books around, and if you can put in that bare minimum effort to read 50 books a year, I think it can make a significant difference, not only to the knowledge you have, but the confidence which you're able to build to be able to use your capabilities. We all are born equal. We all have enough amount of capability physically and mentally. The question is what effort we put into to enhance our capabilities, or to be able to make the use of our capabilities. And I think that can happen through reading. Reading can give you that level of confidence to be able to face situations, to be able to take up challenges, to proactively take up new initiatives which can make a difference to your life or to your family. And I think there's absolutely no substitute for reading. What reading gives you, I don't think that can come from anyone. A lot of people ask me how I managed to read so many books. So even if you take a 52 book target for the year, which is one book a week, which basically means you have 7 days to finish, let's say, a 300-page book. Roughly, you need to read 40 pages a day.
Yeah.
And average human, 40 pages cannot take more than 25-30 minutes. Okay. So my question is, if you shower every day, if you brush your teeth every day, if you have at least one meal a day, you can definitely take out 35-40 minutes to read a book. That's exactly all you need. Exactly. I think the second thing is the selection of the book has to be right. If you're not liking the book, regardless of whether you spent $200 or $500 or $1,000 or you got it for free, that money is gone. It's not going to come back to you. So that basic urge that, everyone has recommended this book, this is supposed to be a good book, but I'm not getting it. Should I continue reading it? I think the answer is no. Okay. Because regardless of however impressive a book is, there will always be some other book which can give you more or less similar knowledge, provided you search hard for it. So if you don't like that book and you still want to learn or improve yourself on that particular topic, a simple Google search will get you a few other books which will be able to help you in the similar way. So give up that book if you don't find it interesting, but make sure that 30-40 minutes of daily reading is involved. Read multiple books if you can, which is supposed to be a great strategy as well, so that you don't get too deeply engrossed into one particular topic and then get bored with it. Okay. If you do, then there is a topic, or there's another book with a different topic to switch to for a short while, and you can always do back and forth. And in a way, it actually increases the speed of reading if you have a variety of content as well. Because if it's the same content, it's boring, you will tend to flip pages, which is not reading the book, right? You tend to take it lightly. You might as well drop the book and start reading another book. I think that's a very straightforward thing. To finish 52 books a year, I think it's a lot more easy. If you still find 52 challenging, start with 10 books, 15 books, 20 books. That's not a problem. Building the habit of reading and understanding that reading is important is more important than reading the book itself. Once you have built the mindset towards reading, rest, leave it to God.
Wow. So like you yourself has been like you have your immense experiences, and you have built yourself like someone who brings values to people. Now, if you had a chance to go back into your early 20s, then what are some of the things that you would tell yourself back then, which you realize now? If you had a chance to go back to your early 20s and tell your 20-year Hetan Sonpal something, what would that advice be? And on that note, what would you like to suggest to the youths of our nation, so that when they get into their 50s, they have a wider vision and a wider meaning of life, and are not just focused on an individualistic growth.
You know what? If I was supposed to roll back my age and look at my 20s, I think I was a complete idiot at that time. Idiot in a more of a humorous sense, because I really didn't do anything significant to realize the potential which I had.
Okay.
I was not reading. I got out of college, I got a job, got into the job, excelled in the job, and I felt doing a good job, earning a great salary, feeding my family, making everyone happy around me was all that I was meant to live, which was so wrong, right? I think there's a much larger meaning to life, and I think everyone, all of us, should focus on trying to discover meaning of life and what life means to us. What is the mission we are here for? Until we don't find the mission, I think we should constantly keep the search on. All of us have that capability of being able to excel in a particular field, which we might not even know that we can actually do something in that field. That stage of discovery and then continuing that requires you to dabble around in different things, right?
Exactly.
You can start singing, you can start dancing, you start reading, you get into running, you can pick up a sport, you can pick up a musical instrument, you can start um, researching on a particular topic, you can do further studies in a particular topic, you can start teaching kids, you can start doing social work. You travel, you experience new places, discover new culture, make more friends, network, be out, right? Be out in the open, expose yourself to as many things as possible.
Yeah.
Because the more you expose, the more you interact, the more you know, the more things will get clear to you in terms of what you are more oriented towards or what you are less oriented towards. And automatically, once you know your mojo, once you know what you're destined for, then you go completely whole hog, because mentally you're ready, emotionally you're ready, physically you're ready, financially you're ready. Just put in your best effort, right? It's not very common in India, but in many US companies, there is a culture of taking a sabbatical every 5 years, every 10 years. The individual just goes off for 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, or a year away from the job and just does what he wants to. And I
Okay.
think that's a great way, because and taking these sabbaticals or breaks early in your career, in your 20s or in your 30s, has far more value than taking it in your 40s.
Yeah.
Because when you're in 20s and 30s, you're young, you're energetic, you can decide to climb mountains, you can go trekking, you can go scuba diving, you can go for a fishing trip, you can go on a cross country trip, you can take a round the world tour. All these jazzy stuff you can do when you're young, energetic, time is on your side. Yes, you might not have a huge pile of money with you, but you are smart enough to be able to manage in a more like a backpacking trip, which
Exactly.
might be more appropriate when you're young. You can do it. Once you get older, responsibility are very difficult to get away with. If you want to get out, your wife does not want you to go. If your wife is okay for you to go, your kids don't want you to go. If your wife and kids are okay, then your parents need you around. You can't just be away for 6 months. It's not easy to do that for everyone. And then all those obstacles start coming in. Your friends don't want to join because they have their own priorities, and you don't want to go alone. A solo trip is much easier when you're young because you really don't bother about others. Once you get older, then you are used to company of your friends and you don't want to go without your friends as well. So I think in a nutshell, the younger, when you're younger in your 20s, dabble around with anything and everything. Network. Unfortunately, I don't need to say switch jobs because that's something which the younger generation already does. But I won't say that switch jobs without a reason. But if you don't find a particular job interesting, have that conversation with the people in your organization and tell them that you're facing a challenge. And if they're still not able to find solution, then yes, you might want to consider switching jobs. But more than switching jobs, I think try switching functions within the organization. try changing bosses in the organization. These are early solutions, easy solutions before you actually change jobs. Once you've tried and tested these things out, in terms of talking to your HR, talking to your manager, switching roles, switching different functions, and then if it's still not working, then finally you can discuss with the company and tell them that you are actually looking out. And I'm sure they will also support you, considering the fact that you've been honest. You're leaving the organization not because you don't like the organization, but you're not able to find the right uh, fitment in that company, which is perfectly okay. It happens with people at all times. Yeah.
Well, that was great, sir. Just to wind up with the conversation, a last one. This is a tradition kind of thing with the Tech Ketchup show. Since you have been an avid reader and you love reading a lot, I know it would be hard to suggest a few books from your side, but if you could just suggest something that has helped you or that has appealed, some of the books that has appealed you a lot more and have taught you much deeper things about life in general. So please, could you do that?
Sure. So I think recommending books is my favorite hobby. So it's actually not difficult to suggest books. In fact, putting a stop at times is difficult in terms of the number
Yeah.
of books. So let me try a few of them. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Excellent book. I think Charles has done deep down research on the aspect of habits, and how people find it difficult to build habits when in reality it's not so. It's a great book. I would strongly recommend that. Mindset by Carol Dweck is another great book. It talks about the normal mindset versus growth mindset, and how kids in early stages, if they are not given the right mindset, later on it becomes very difficult for them in their school and in their career to be able to improve upon changing their attitude towards life in general. Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, Story of Nike, is a great book from an autobiography perspective. It's a beautiful book. It talks about how Phil's journey about creating Nike, the company, the brand. He's an avid runner himself, and the great way in which he is shown the importance of running in his overall life and career is very interesting. Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open, is again an excellent autobiography. It is one of the best autobiographies which I've read. Deep down personal. I have tracked Andre Agassi's career right from his first match to the last match. So when I read his autobiography, I could relate to the instances in his life which he talks about. When he had long hair, he used to insist on wearing denim shorts. He was completely a maverick and would do what he feels like, and still he was a great tennis player. So that's again another great book. How Will You Measure Your Life? I think again it's a great book. It deeply researches on topics which are extremely important and very relevant in today's context. Let me think about a few more since you have asked about it. Nudge by Richard Haller, I think, is again a great book, strongly recommended. It's got a lot of interesting instances from the corporate life, which you can learn from. Which ones? For women, I think there is no better book than Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. Option B by Sheryl Sandberg is again a great follow-up book. Another writer which I like a lot is Adam Grant. He's got two books called Give and Take and Originals. Again, these are excellent books. And I think from a research of reading perspective, you should just dabble around with different books. Read a lot of online reviews. There are plenty of online reviews. So you will have abundant clarity before you buy a book, whether that book is interesting enough for your reading perspective. And once you read a book, then talk about it, share it with people, because once you share it, write a note, write a blog on it. Because once you start sharing, your own inherent knowledge about that book and the learnings gets much stronger. A topic is lost if you are not able to spend enough time ruminating over it, deliberating over it, trying to apply the learnings in your own life, trying to explain to others how they can apply in their life, and that's the best way to do it. The other thing is in terms of format. I read physical books, I read digital books, and I read Audible. I work in all three different formats. You can choose which format is convenient for you. Some people find it inconvenient carrying a book around, but you have your phone with you all the time. The phone has a Kindle software, and you can actually read digital books on the phone. And if you say that, boss, reading is still difficult for me, then Audible, to listen to audiobooks, is again a great example. When you're walking around, when you're traveling, when you're running, you can switch on your Audible and listen to a book. It's a great way for speed reading, and I do it a lot. I think Audible is one major success factor why I've been able to read so many books in a short period of time.
Wow. That was great, sir, having you on the show, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And to all our listeners, on whatever platform you're listening to, please like, subscribe, share, and follow the Tech Ketchup Show on Nerd for Tech Originals for listening to more such engaging conversations on technology, innovations, and entrepreneurship. This is your host, Kushak Srivastav, signing off. Goodbye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Kushal.